I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. Thanks so much for joining me on another episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. Um, it's school holidays at the moment where I am, and so this understanding about meltdowns and children's stress, but also my own, is something that's playing out day to day for me right now. And I imagine for many of you as well out there on school holidays also. The title of today's podcast is The Neuroscience of Meltdowns, What Every Parent Needs to Know. I love neuroscience, but it's really hefty reading. And so I remember having a book beside my bed for years, which was called The Neuroscience of Attachment. And I was struggling to get through it bit by bit. But I did persist. It's really difficult. So if I recommend books for you to read as parents, they're always going to be ones that are easy to digest because the reality is we just, if it's too hard, we just don't do it. And then you miss out on the information. I'm going to try and talk about it in ways today that's really helpful and easy to understand for parents. But I do think that understanding the neuroscience, so fancy word of saying what's happening in the brain, is really important because I always say that the more we understand, the more empathy we can have, and that leads to patience. And I think it's really true in times of meltdown as well. The more we can understand about what's going on for our kids, the more we can pick the right strategies that work, but also it helps us be more empathic, understanding, and patient. And that's what we all need in times of a meltdown. So I want to go through a few key points today, which are about just understanding the brain during a meltdown or emotional overwhelm. That's going to be a little bit like there's lots of information in there, but then I also want to talk about to recognize and understand the triggers before that happens, before the storm, if you will, the signs when your kid is approaching a meltdown, and then also talk about some evidence-based strategies that can de-escalate the situation or bring the intensity down, because that's what we all want to happen, I guess. So many parents have kids who have difficulties with regulating their emotions. So if it's you, you are definitely not alone in your experience. It's really hard. It's so hard to know what to do in the moment because of many, many things. One is the judgment of others. One is that sometimes we have automatic parenting reflexes that are probably based on how we were raised and our early experiences of things kind of beyond, not beyond, but before we had language to be able to explain what we're learning. We've learned how to respond to our kids because of how our parents responded to us. That in itself is a topic for another day, but it's incredibly difficult. And so I know these are really helpful strategies and they're evidence based and they do work, but I know that it's not easy personally and professionally, I guess. But, the hope is that the more you understand what's happening and the more you can see those meltdowns coming, the easier it is for you to intervene. Yeah, that's the goal. So, a little bit about the brain, I guess, understanding the brain during that emotional overwhelm or a meltdown. There are 3 kind of parts to the brain. I think it's not always helpful to go into the details of them because the brain interacts together. So there are different parts, but they do communicate and interact with each other. But I mean, this is going to be helpful for you as parents because I explain stuff to children all the time. So the language is simple. There is that kind of reptilian part of the brain, and that's what controls our survival, really. So that is things like breathing, heart beating, that kind of thing. It controls regulating temperature and fight or flight responses. It's automatic, it's instinctive, it's focused on survival and keeping the body alive. We call it the reptilian brain because it's the oldest part. So if we think about it in evolutionary terms, it's the part that's been there the longest. An example of that is maybe when you get startled by a loud noise, you get that quick kind of maybe a jump scare, the kids might say these days, or a quick fight or flight response. We're really keyed in for danger there, so it's immediate and instinctive. Next level is the emotional brain, and that's the part that handles emotions, memories, and getting along or bonding with other people. It stores emotional memories so that that can guide what we do in the future. So it's still reactive because it's emotional, but its primary goal is to drive attachment and social connection. An example might be feeling happy when you see someone you love, like a dear friend or family member, or fearful when you see something that reminds you of something in the past. Next, we have the thinking part of the brain. And this, I'm going like this because, well, if you're listening, you can't see, but on YouTube, you'll see me using my hand up because it's the top or the front part of the brain. It's responsible for higher level thinking, so problem solving, logical reasoning, language, creativity, and self-control and planning. That's an area that lots of times ADHDers have challenges with. Um, but you can see how it's the most complex part of the brain. We have to have the other two in check before we can do these things like problem solve and plan. It's usually rational, it's reflective, and it balances out those instincts from our reptile brain with the emotional things we're experiencing and still able to use information to solve problems. An example there might be if you're solving in a math test and you're coming, you're being able to solve the problem, or maybe you're having a stressful situation and you're reasoning with yourself to calm yourself down. That's that thinking part of the brain. These things all interact with through the kind of nervous system in the brain, which also has three parts to it. So for the nervous system there, it operates in three different ways or has three different functions to it. The first thing is what keeps us safe and social. And so that means that, yeah, that part of the nervous system is active when we feel safe. So we feel calm, connected, and able to interact with others. An example of this might be when you're having a conversation with friends or family, you're just chilling and being social. The next system is like the fight or flight system. That's when we sense danger, that system kicks in. So we might detect danger and fear, and we feel anxious, stressed, or ready to fight or to run away. An example might be when your heart races before a big presentation. And then we have another part, which is the shutdown or freeze component. So that's where we feel overwhelmed by danger or we can't escape. We might feel numb or disconnected or checked out. And the freeze response, I guess, in evolutionary terms, is to try to not be noticed by the predator. An example of that is feeling frozen during a very stressful event. So sometimes things like a car accident or even, public speaking, people can kind of freeze. These systems all interact with each other, but I think the most important thing to think about is in the setting of a meltdown, we actually need, um, with without everything being online and operational in a way, we have trouble with the problem solving side of things. Um, yeah, so we kind of need to make sure that kids feel safe and that their emotions are acknowledged before we're able to do any kind of problem solving about the situation. That links in with both, the levels or different parts of the brain we talked about, but then the different systems as well in the nervous system means if one is um, activated, like the fight or flight or the shutdown or freeze, we're not able to access the other parts. So we really kind of go into this danger response that had a purpose in evolution because if a predator was there, we needed to be able to act really quickly. But we cannot problem solve. I think for me, that's really helpful to understand because a lot of the time where we go wrong as parents, me included, is to try and pick that moment to have a conversation about the situation or what's happening, or convey our beliefs about what a child should have done differently and that kind of thing. I am aware that as a parent, when my child's having a meltdown and I get stressed, I am also not able to access that logical part of my brain. So I will be responding from a very emotional point of view, and it often, I mean, it never helps the situation if I do that. Um, if I'm saying, well, maybe you should have done this or that, or it's because this happened, all it ends up doing is escalating the situation. So these this inability to access that rational, logical part of the brain is not just happening for our kids, it's happening for us as parents in those moments as well. So it's really important to recognize once you get to that point, there's not much you can do yourself if you are upset as a parent, if unless you can kind of try to calm your emotions and regulate your nervous system so that you're not so that you can operate in that place of logic. So that might mean walking away, taking a break, and using any of the evidence-based strategies we're going to talk through in a second. The last bit I wanted to mention about the brain before we move into recognizing the signs and knowing what to do about a meltdown is to think about the connection between sensory processing and emotional regulation as well. There is a link between those things. And if your child has sensitivities and they are overwhelmed or irritated by that sensory stuff around them, it is going to make emotional regulation more difficult. So being really aware of the environment as one of the contributing factors is a good thing for you because oftentimes it's hard to calm a child down, but you may find it easier to change some parts of the environment. Might have more control over that and make it easier. So that was a crash course for you in the neuroscience of a meltdown. And I think I managed to get away without actually referencing a single part of the brain, which was my goal, because really what you need to understand is what's happening. Doesn't matter if you know where it is in the brain or anything, it's just really about knowing what your child's experiencing. And that's what I was trying to convey. These next things, these are all part of what we talk about in the Chaos to Calm parenting program. And it's been this week that we've been talking about what to do in the moment of a meltdown. So we unpack. these strategies in more detail and then have a look at making a plan for what to do in future when it happens for your child. Um, and so that's what it's been on my mind for that reason this week. So let's move into the strategies. Sorry, not the strategies, the triggers. So if you can identify some of these physical signs that a meltdown is coming, you are better able to stop it or intervene before it gets too big. The key with emotional regulation is always the smaller the emotions, the easier they are to manage and regulate. So by getting in as early as you can, you will be better off, and so will your kid. So some of the changes, because we've talked about how those meltdowns are related to emotions kind of running wild and getting into that fight or flight response. Lots of times there are physical signs of those things because our body is preparing to handle a stressful situation. So, some common things you might see are changes in breathing patterns. I've noticed that kids seem to hyperventilate a little bit more, so that's short, shallow breaths rather than their regular breathing pattern. You might notice muscle tension, so where kids seem to be kind of poised in this stiff manner, or holding their jaw really tightly. There can be voice changes, so sometimes through things like gritted teeth or change in a voice or more of a growling kind of presentation. That can happen as well. There might also be some environmental signs as well. So, some of those things, triggers. So, that might be sensory overload. It can be social demands. You might see that your child's had to do a few too many transitions. So, lots of those things, if you are aware of them, that can let you know a meltdown might be coming. And then there are some things that are really hard to pick out because they're inside the child, internal triggers. So that might be things like being tired, being hungry or thirsty, or also that sensory overwhelm, also. It can occur sometimes to things that we're not aware of, we don't easily see. But looking out for all of these signs can be a good way to know that a meltdown might be coming. I want to talk about then if it does happen, what can you do? Also, you don't have to wait for it to happen. If you feel like it might be coming, use these strategies because if your child's got any stress at all, they will help and they'll bring the stress down. Um, it might be an opportunity then that you could prevent one from happening, and that's great. So there's a couple of things that fit in with this idea of that fight or flight response that we get. And they are aligned with a theory that it's those kind of bodily changes, like a really fast heart rate, and muscle tension and stress, last for 90 seconds or so. I think that could be, I mean, the difference, I mean, an exception to the rule for me might be anxiety, where that kind of can, kids can feel that way a lot. But I guess the point is that these changes don't last and they can only be there for a short amount of time. So knowing that can just help us know that we've got to, first of all, do it for ourselves to ride through those body changes until our body calms down again, but also help our child to do that for a short amount of time. If we can do that and the emotions regulate, then it's a much shorter meltdown. Often, what can happen is if there's lots of things going on in the situation and the environment doesn't change and we're trying to intervene, but we're re-triggering our child, then that meltdown can last for longer. Sometimes it seems like a really long one, but it could be a series of of these smaller events that kind of the child never quite gets to the point of regulating themselves quite back down. So some of the things that you can do is, first of all, deep breathing. Psychologists recommend that a lot. I know kids don't always do it, but the reason is because when we're breathing out, it links automatically to that nervous system. So some breathing exercises are great. Slow breathing, so trying to count in for 4 and then breathe out for longer, like 6 or 8. Humming or singing. So the vagus nerve, that's the part of the neuroanatomy we're talking about, that is linked to the vocal cords. So doing things like humming, singing, or chanting can help. Anything you like is fine. Another one is cold water on the face. That can really help you're trying to calm that nervous system down, without having to do any problem solving yet. So just doing deep breathing, just humming or singing, cold water on the face can be really good. And then look at some environmental changes, maybe dimming the lights if there's lots of lights on, decreasing the noise, maybe giving your child something that's a comfort that they can touch and feel. All of these things. Oh, an ice pack is a good alternative to cold water as well. So an ice pack on the chest or the back of the neck can be a really great way to calm the nervous system down. And after this point, your child might need a little bit of time after they are regulated, then to be able to talk about the situation or problem solve it. But for right now, that's all I wanted to focus on, was understanding what's happening for your child in the moment, um, knowing the signs so you can prevent it if you're lucky or intervene earlier, and then some evidence-based things that you can do to calm the nervous system down. To summarize those again, it's deep breathing or slow breathing, humming or singing, cold water on the face, and then or an ice pack, and then changing the environment. We will talk more about lots of other parts of this, how to problem solve and make sure it doesn't happen again, and learn to manage emotions better in the future. That is all part of what we do in the Chaos to Calm program as well, because there are actually a lot of things that you can do to try and strengthen the ability to handle emotions like this. And that's part that we go through in setting up a really good environment for your kids at home, because there's lots of routine things that you can do that will, yeah, strengthen this process of regulating emotions. And that means that long term, you're going to have less meltdowns as well. So it's hang around for more of that information, or if you'd love to be a part of the Chaos to Calm program, it's going to start again in January for 2025. So we work together for about a term and try and get lots of the basics in place that helps encourage really positive well-being and thriving, and then also um, focuses on what to do when the meltdowns happen, just like we have today. So thanks again for joining me. Do let me know if you have any ideas about what would be helpful as a topic, because I am collating a bit of a list that I will get into in the new year, and feel very excited that I'll be able to provide the answers to exactly the kinds of questions that you have. See you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Tran Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.